So I have screen sharing ability.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, okay, cool. Um, so, uh, yeah, Before I get started, I just want to thank my mentor, Professor Richard Kay of the English department, for helping me with this research project and for giving me all the guidance I needed, and also for personally mailing to me a lot of the sources that I needed because the pandemic made it really hard to access libraries. So that was really helpful. Thank you. And then I also want to thank the Mellon Public Humanities program and staff. So Professor Israel, Professor Alkov, Jonathan Thitbanton, and Arden Armbruster, as well as the Mellon Foundation for making this opportunity possible. So thank you. So I'll just get into it. So for my research project, I compared the ideas of the British feminist writer Virginia Woolf in her books A Room of One's Own and Three Guineas to the ideas of the American feminist Betty Friedan in her book The Feminine Mystique. And out of their books, I tried to construct what Woolf and Friedan thought the ideal work situation for women in the professions is, and what they saw as the ideal relationship between women's professional and domestic labor. So in my paper, I contend that Woolf argues for the restructuring of professional work to accommodate women's domestic needs and the domestic sphere at large. She advocates for the professional and domestic spheres to take on equal cultural value, and she argues against a current professional culture that she sees as masculinist, hyper-competitive, and exclusionary. She states that professional culture should be more founded on traits associated with women, specifically, and she's like, quote, poverty, chastity, derision, and freedom from unreal loyalties. And then Friedan, in comparison, repeatedly trivializes the domestic sphere and domestic work in comparison to professional labor. And for most of her book, she argues that balancing domestic and professional labor poses little challenge to working women. She also, with a few exceptions, argues that women should enter into professional life as it is and emulate the men who already exist in what she, like Woolf, considers to be a competitive professional culture. But in her case, she sees it as a rightfully competitive professional sphere. So I should note that this, like what you're seeing on the slide here, isn't at all a complete list of the sources that I used, but some of the existing scholarship that was particularly influential on my thinking were Christine Frula's and Alex Swerdling's books, which provided a lot of context for me on why Woolf was so focused on the competitiveness of the professional sphere. And they also allowed me to better understand Woolf's brand of feminism and her separatism. And Daniel Horowitz's and Stephanie Kuntz's books gave me a lot of historical and social context for Betty Friedan's book. And they also provided the foundation for my arguments on why Friedan heavily dismissed the issue of the conflict between paid and unpaid labor for women in her book. My argument being that Friedan was trying to, in this problematic way, give women a sense of agency by downplaying the structural barriers to women's entrance into the professional workforce. So for the public outreach component of my project, I organized an event with the New York Public Library's Business Center that takes a more contemporary look at the struggles of women to manage domestic and paid labor. And unlike Woolf and Friedan's books, we focused on women of all social classes, not just white, middle class, and upper middle class women. The event was titled Women and the Workplace, COVID-19 and Beyond, and it took place on March 26th on Google Meet. It was an hour-and-a-half long panel where I moderated a discussion between professors Alice Kessler-Harris, Ruth Milkman, and Ann Bookman on the effects of the COVID-19 crisis on women's labor. So we spoke about the historical circumstances that led women to be so unsupported in terms of childcare resources when the pandemic closed schools and intensified the struggles that women had already been experiencing and performing disproportionate amounts of unpaid household and care labor while also performing paid work. So we began the event with a short presentation by each of the professors. Professor Kessler-Harris discussed how social policy regarding the workforce is meant to serve primarily male breadwinners in two-spouse families, with women being expected to take care of domestic and childcare needs. Professor Milkman discussed how the pandemic has caused much more unemployment among women than men, unlike in past economic crises, such as the Great Depression or the 2008 crisis. And Professor Bookman discussed the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021, which actually had just been passed when our event took place. And she also talked about the benefits that it would deliver to families with children and also childcare providers. So we then had a 40-minute discussion where I posed questions and the panelists discussed the amount of unpaid work that women continue to take on today in comparison to men, and what they believed would allow us to progress toward gender equality in terms of domestic and paid labor. And then the last 20 minutes of the event was devoted to a Q&A with the audience. So I'd like to share a short clip from the event where Professor Bookman discusses how she believes we can better support women through the performance of unpaid work and also work towards a more equal division of domestic labor. And I think to hear it, I have to take out my headphones. So let me just, okay.
Optimistic about that. Professor Bookman, I had a question relating to what you just said. Do you think that wide-scale policy changes are a way to kind of address those stigmas associated with domestic work? Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we can't put all of our eggs in the public policy basket, and I think that the cultural issues that Alice was highlighting, are extremely important. We can't underestimate the kind of some of the underlying ways that these different sort of gender division of labor is taught in the family from very early on, and how to, I mean, a lot of people argue that it's incredibly important to have gender equal materials that promote gender equality at very, very, very young ages in early care and education settings, and I certainly agree with that. So I think we're looking at, kind of what is going on in our childcare settings and in our schools around gender roles. We're looking at what is going on in the media around gender roles, which is, could be like a whole other panel, and I don't think we really have time to get into it. And then, then the public policy sphere. So, I mean, I think what we're going to require to get to a more truly gender equitable society is working on these cultural levels, these educational levels, formal and informal, and the public policy sphere. And I think if you integrate this and put these all together in a very dedicated, coordinated way, maybe we'll make some progress.
Okay. So,
domestic.
sorry. So yeah, thank you for listening.